previous videos, we have been discussing that now we are going to discuss about the data types, right? So we have actually came across data type concept into our previous video itself, where we were discussing about that when we were actually taking the user from when we were actually taking the user input, then we were able to see that the user input was being taken in a string format, right? Then we actually typecasted it in an integer format, we typecasted it in a Boolean format or float format such that we were able to take that input in a proper format itself. So this proper format or this kind of value that we take from the user side or the kind of value that we store into a variable is something we can refer it to as a data type, right? So let me just create a new file over here into the specific folder itself. I'm going to name this file as data types .ipynb, and let me just put a new markdown cell over here as data types. So in simple terms, you guys can say that data types, again, as a real life analogy I will be providing to you guys, then you can see that for example, I'm using a specific jar in which I'm going to store something as a kind of solid material. I'm having a kind of ingredient, right? Like you can say, I'm storing sugar into it. I'm storing salt into it. So that is like a solid kind of material, right? In a similar way, into a jar itself, I can store a liquid kind of material. So that is again one of the type in which I can store the data. That is also one of the type of ingredient I can store into my jar. Just like that, into a variable itself, you guys can store an integer value as well. So integer is going to be one of the type of value, just like one of the type of ingredient we were having as salt or sugar. Just like that, into a variable, we can store a floating type kind of value as well. That will be consisting of some decimal points into it. In a similar way, into a single variable itself, we guys can go with storing values like a string value as well, or we can store a value inside it as a Boolean value as well. So Boolean is going to be a true false value. So the type of value, so definitely when I'm going to store a value like 23 into my variable, so that if I'm going to check for its type, so it will be coming under the category of integer. Just like that, if I'm going to store a value as 5.8, 5.11, so that is going to be, so the type, if I'm going to check for that specific value, is going to be float. So that is what a data type exactly is, right? So in simple terms, I can say that data types, and why exactly do we need to have the basic idea about the data types, is because when I was taking the input from the user side that we were looking into in our previous video, so when I was asking for the user to enter his or her age, so that age we were actually taking in a string format. That's because we were not explicitly taking the input in an integer format, right? So just because we haven't used the int function with respect to our input, so that's why we were not exactly able to take the input in a proper format. So every time you guys are going to take some input, every time you guys are going to store a value into your variable, you have to make sure about one thing, that that specific value should be in an appropriate format itself. You can't take the value for age in a string format, you can't take it in a float format. You have to make sure that the category for that specific value must be integer, right? Just like that, if I'm going to take the name as the input, then the category for name must be a string value. So all of these things you guys are required to take care of from your side, right? So in simple terms, we can say that data types are classification of the data that tells the compiler or the interpreter, just because we can write both compiler or interpreter, just because data type concept is not exactly limited to Python only, but data types concept is actually in C++ language or other languages as well. And in the case of C++ or Java language, you will be making the use of compiler, right? So data types are classification of the data that tells the compiler or the interpreter, that is valid in the case of Python language, that what kind of values we can store into a variable. And definitely, if I'm going to store a sugar into a specific jar, then the sugar is going to take some amount of, you can say, a kind of weight it is going to have, right? So sugar content into a specific jar is going to have a specific amount of weight. In a similar way, liquid content into a similar jar is going to have another amount of weight. The weight for the liquid content might not come out to be same as that of the weight of the sugar content or a solid content. Just like that, the memory the memory for an integer value is not going to be the same as that of the memory which a character is going to store, right? Character or string value is going to store. So data types are the classification of the data that tells the compiler or the interpreter that what kind of values we can store into a variable and how much amount of memory will be consumed to store the data, right? So memory, so it's similar to that of the weight, that the kind of so basically the weight that the kind of specific item we are going to store into a jar is going to take. So that is something we can relate with respect to the amount of memory. And then the kind of operations it can perform, right? That's because with respect to a specific kind of data, you can perform a specific set of operations. You can go with a concatenation kind of operation wherein you can join two strings together, right? But that specific operation might not be valid in the case of an integer value, right? So consume to store the data and the operations it can perform. Now let me go with example wherein I will be explaining it to you that why exactly data type is quite crucial over here. So for example, if I'm going to take an input from the user side, and that input is going to be in a way wherein I'm asking the user to enter his or her age. All right, again, markdown cell we are using. Instead of markdown cell, we should go with a coding cell, right? Shift plus enter, select your kernel, and every time you are going to create a new file, you have to explicitly select the kernel, okay? Now, if I'm going to run this specific piece of code, you guys can see that it is going to ask me out for entering my age. If I'm going to enter it as 20, let us go with 30. All right. Then, if I'm going to first of all, look into the value, that what value age variable is storing. So it is coming out to be as 30. But you guys can see that it is enclosed within the columns, right? And whatever value is going to be enclosed within the columns, that value is nothing but a string kind of value. And just to actually validate that, I'm going to simply look into the type of age. I'm going to print the type. So type is nothing but the data type. So I'm going to print the data type of age variable, and it is coming out to be a string. And definitely we can't take the age value into a string format. Why exactly so? I will be showing it to you, right? For example, I'm having this age value over here as 30, right? If I'm going to create another variable as age2, all right, and in this specific variable, I'm storing 40 over here. Okay, so let me just print the value for age2. It is coming out to be 40. Now with respect to age, that is 30, if I'm going to add it with respect to age 2, then you guys will get to see that we are going to get this error. Why exactly we are getting this error? Just because you can first of all look into this error that can only concatenate string, not integer to a string. Right. So as I was mentioning that a specific set of operations you guys can go with respect to a specific data type. Plus kind of operation you guys, or addition kind of operation you guys can only go with if both of your variables are consisting of integer value. And just like that, concatenation operation you guys can only go with if both of your variables are consisting of string value. So let me do one thing over here. Let me take the input in an integer format. Right. Again, if you want to take an input in an integer format, you can simply make the use of this int function. I can now write it as, let me take the input as 34. All right. Now let me print age over here. You can see that columns we are not having. So just because we are not having columns, then this simply states that the data type for this specific age is coming out to be as integer. Again, it is coming out to be 34. Age 2 is coming out to be 40. All right. And now finally, if I'm going to add age 1, that was 34 plus 40. So now if I'm going to apply this plus operation, you guys can see that we are able to get 74. Right. So this operation is something that we can apply only when the data type for both variables is going to be integer only. Just like that, let me just do one thing. Let me just remove this int. Let me take the input in a kind of string format itself. Okay. Let me go with 40 now as the input, but this time it is going to be again in a form of string. All right, let me show you the data type for it. And now into my age variable, let me take a string value as hello. So I'm going to store into it. Let us see what exactly is age 2. And now if I'm going to add age 1, age value. So age value, what exactly it was? It was a string 40. 40 value, but it was enclosed within the columns itself. So it was a string value. So this string value plus age 2, if I'm going to add. So now this time you guys will get to see that these two values are getting concatenated. These are getting added, joined together. Right. So joining operation is happening in between the two variables. So this will be simply stating it to you that with respect to a specific data type, you guys can simply go with a specific set of operations. With respect to string, like let me just show it to you. If I'll just enter over here str. So str stands for string data type, right? Inside this function, if you're going to pass anything, that will be getting converted into a string format itself. Just like that, we guys can have, like let me just show it to you. If I'm going to create a variable as a equals to str, let me run this code. Let me check for type of a, what exactly it is. You guys can see that it is coming out to be in a string format. So if I'll just check that what all different kind of operations I can perform, what I can do is that I can simply make the use of this dot. So whenever after any function you are going to make the use of dot, you guys can see that what all operations you can apply, what all operations you can perform with respect to string data. So these are all of the set of operations you can perform, right? You can check, you can simply store a value into a variable as a string value, and then you can simply capitalize the first letter of it. You can apply something as a count operation, something like this, right? In a similar way, with respect to int data type, these are the set of operations you can apply. So you can see that again, this set of operations are different from those of the operations with respect to string. Just like that, with respect to a float data type, again some other set of operations, and just like that, with respect to bool data type, you guys can see some other set of operations. Right. So we have discussed about this thing that why exactly is data type quite crucial for us, and let us just finally get into this thing that what are different kind of data types we are having. All right. So we are having different kind of data types. So let me just create a new markdown cell over here. So different types of data types. All right. So we can have integer as one of the data type, int as one of the data type. Just like that, we can have string as one of the data type. Just like that, we can have bool as one of the data type. And just like that, we can have float as one of the data type. Okay, so that's exactly how you guys can think about it. So these are the different four kind of data types we can have. So either we can store the input value, we can store a string value into a variable, we can store a Boolean value like true or false, or we can store a value like a float value, right? So let me do one thing now. Let me just show it to you guys that what exactly is the integer value. So a equals to 23. If I'm going to check for its type of a, you guys can see that it is coming out to be as integer. In a similar way, if I'm going to keep this variable b, wherein I'm going to store something as Amit, and then if I'm going to check for the type of b, you guys can see that it is coming out to be string. Just like that, into my C variable, if I'm going to store a value like 14.4, let us say, and then if I'm going to check for the type of C, it is coming out to be as float. And just like that, if I'm going to, let us say if I'm going to create a variable is true, and inside this variable, if I'm going to store the value as true, and now if I'm going to check for the type of is true, it is coming out to be as Boolean. So that's exactly how you guys can think about it, right? That's exactly how you guys can think about the data type of the given variable itself, right? So in one more way, you guys can simply get the Boolean value. Let me do one thing. Let me create a variable as a equals to 7. Okay, b equals to 7 again. And let me check that whether if these two values are equal to each other or not. So what I can do is that, or whether if these two variables are storing similar value or not. So for checking that out, what I can do is that I can make the use of double equal to operator. Now you can see that whenever we are going to make the use of this double equal to operator, we can again get a Boolean value. But on the other hand, if I'm going to declare a variable, let us say as a as 34, b as 29, and now if I'm going to check that whether if a is equal to b or not, then you guys will get to see that we are getting false over here. That's because the value that a variable is storing is not coming out to be same as that of value of b. So these are the only 4 data types that we always need to take care of from our side. These are just the basic data types that we have just discussed about. In our upcoming videos, we are going to discuss about the data structures in Python, wherein we will be coming across list as a data type. We are going to come across tuples. We are going to come across dictionaries, sets as well. And that is actually going to be quite complex, right? So these were just some of the basic data types that we have just looked into. And then you can see that I have used a double equal to operator over here. What exactly this double equal to operator is, and what exactly a operator is, right? So all of these things, all of this discussion we are going to come across in our upcoming video, and that would be all with respect to the discussion about the data types, and let us meet in the next video. So thank